Hi, good evening. My name is McCarthy Coyle, and you're watching A Public Conversation. And the family photograph that you see behind me was taken last summer here in Missoula. And the lovely looking woman with the beautiful smile is my mother, Marie, born Maria. And then myself and my uncle Dan McCarthy in the blue shirt, my mother's older brother. My mother is 85 in that picture, taken last summer, and then Uncle Dan is 92 in that photograph, and then their brother Pat with the glasses, Uncle Pat McCarthy is 89, and then they all came out. Uncle Dan was living here with me in Missoula at the time for most of last year, and then my mother and Uncle Pat came out for a visit, so we were all together for about 10 days. And that's me, of course, in the gaudy shirt and the curly hair back last summer. Um, and I want to welcome you tonight. I'm not going to take any phone calls tonight. I'm going to talk about family and memories because some of you may know that my mother died a couple of weeks ago down in Florida. And Jeff Smith, my friend here in Missoula, filled in for me 2 weeks ago and did a fine job. Thanks, Jeff. And so I did want to take this time to talk about memories and family. Got my Irish t-shirt on tonight. The flag of Ireland there. Also, as other members of my family are, we're dual citizens of both Ireland and the United States. It's strange. Uncle Dan died in October, and then I'm confused about because things take on such a rapid cycle when one's parent dies that I'm a little bit confused about whether it was 2 weeks ago or it must be 3 weeks ago that went down to Bernice's Bakery to get a cup of coffee on a Sunday morning, and I got back to the house, and my good friend Ann said, there was a message on the machine, and your brother called and said it's an emergency. And I called him right away, my older brother Gene, buddy, and he bit the bullet, and he said, Mother is dead. And so that's how it comes. Just, as my mother used to say when we were kids, ye know not the day nor the hour. She used to kind of try and intimidate us that way, and of course she's right. We don't know the day nor the hour. So the hour for my mother came on a Sunday, I think it was February 6th, and within 2 hours in America today, of course, we hop on a jet plane and head for the place where we're needed. And we had quite a wonderful celebration of my mother's life while we were there. I have a wonderful, great big brother, I call him, and he is a big brother. He's older and he is bigger. And he's very patient, and we were there together the whole time. And then there were 8 grandchildren there and 2 great-grandchildren. And we had to deal with undertakers, and we had to deal with the hospital, and we had to turn down requests for autopsies because the hospital was nervous that maybe they hadn't done the right thing. But the family, I see there the director has got us lined up there. That's a picture from around 1943. That's my older brother there, Buddy, Gene, and my older sister, Patricia. And myself, when of course I had my big mouth open already, and but I've always loved that photo, and I think my mother took that, and we were living in a little tiny town in Virginia. My father was, a civilian employee of the Army during World War II, and I treasure that photo. It's one of those sepia-toned photos which you can't quite really see on your home screens, but and now we're all older. My brother is 62, and I think he turned 62 while we were together in Florida, celebrating my mother's life. And we did a fairly non-traditional thing anymore in America, as we brought her home to the house, and we waked her at home. And we got our own flowers together, and we did all those kinds of things. I'm a little bit, as you can see, a little bit scattered, and there won't be any real sequence to tonight's show, because my memories. When I walked into MCAT tonight, my old friend Mary Canty, who has met my mother on several occasions, and in fact, rescued my mother and Uncle Dan off of Greyhound buses from Canada many years ago in Missoula. So Mary and I go back a long time, probably 14 years. And so she knows the Coyle family and our ins and outs. But anyway, when I walked in tonight, Mary and I were both thinking of the same thing, that one time Mary and I were doing a public service political spot for, what was it, a bottle bill in Montana, in which there was an organization trying to pass legislation that would require deposits on bottles and cans. And so Peter Fonda was coming over to Missoula to videotape this, public service campaign spot with Mary and our other dear friend and partner, Marcia O'Malley. And so my mother happened to be in town at the time on vacation. And so, of course, how could I deny my mother the opportunity to meet Peter Fonda? So my mother was down at our office at MQ-TV, Montanans for Quality Television, and we were all waiting for Fonda. And Mary and I had spoken to Fonda over the phone, and so we weren't prepared to be intimidated. So finally Fonda shows up, and we introduce ourselves, and then I said to Fonda, I said, Peter, I'd like you to meet my mother, Marie Coyle. And so my mother, stuck out her hand and shook his hand very firmly and looked him in the eye, and she said, well, I really like your sister. And so my mother was a character. I was thinking about my mother, and I used this before. She was a trooper to the end, and when I came in tonight, Mary and I were both talking about the fact that in my mother's case, she was still living in her own home, but she was getting increasingly, tired, weak. She wasn't really, she didn't have cancer. She wasn't suffering, but she was lonesome since Uncle Dan died. And she was trying to decide whether to move to California near my brother, or move to Missoula to be near me, or to move up north near her grandchildren in Virginia or Washington. And she didn't really want to do any of those things. And she didn't want to move into a senior complex. And she didn't want to have a stroke and be in a nursing home. And so she pretty much got everything that she wanted in that regard. She was still in her own house, and she went into the emergency room out of breath on a Saturday night a few weeks back, and she was glad to be in the hospital and getting some rest. And in the morning she was up and had some breakfast, and the nurses said she was feeling pretty perky. And then that was early Sunday morning, and they went to make rounds about 11 o'clock in the morning, and she was dead. And so the family, I think, is happy for her that she didn't have a lot of long-term suffering. She lived a long life, and I think she had enough, as we all do, of life's problems and crosses to bear without having to bear more than she should have had to bear. She went to see the movie Philadelphia in the week before she died, and it was strange when my brother and I walked in the house in Florida, and we hadn't been to the hospital yet, and there was a teacup on the counter. The tea bag was still in the empty cup. there was a piece of half-eaten raisin bread toast on a little saucer. I knew she must have been really, really tired and weary because her mail, and in our family, as most of us are, we're always anxious for the mail, right? We're waiting for the mail every day. And Saturday's mail was on top of the television, and she hadn't opened, her personal mail, which included a Valentine from me. So I knew she must have been pretty tired if she hadn't had the energy to open up her mail. One of her grandchildren at the funeral and at the graveside talked about what spunk and grit and determination she had, and he said, when I called up Graham, he said, and it was time to say goodbye, and he'd say, well, I love you, Graham, and he said, and she always came right back and said, and she said, I love you right back. And my mother was a pretty fierce, I think, person, someone that you'd like to be in the trenches with. She wasn't afraid of life, and she wasn't afraid to be political. And I did recall on a recent show, there she is. I mean, my mother, I wish I'd brought that humorous piece. There she is, man. She'd like to serve up that chow. I don't know whether that's a piece of round steak or a huge piece of liver. She used to feed us. We'd get up Saturday mornings, was liver and bacon, and that's what we'd have to eat on Saturday mornings. And, of course, we got to like it because that was what she put on the table, and we damn well better like it because she didn't really like to cook that much. I don't think she never baked. She didn't sew. She wasn't that kind of a woman. But she did get the chow on the table, and we loved that photo in the family because we could just hear her saying, oh, come on, finish up that last little mouthful. Here, eat up these last bit of string beans. Have another helping of potatoes. She wanted us to eat, eat, eat. She gave us independence. That was a great gift from my mother. There's a picture of my mother, myself, and Uncle Dan McCarthy at an awards ceremony in Manhattan, and that was an award won by MQTV, Mary, I think, for that documentary on the handicapped of Missoula that we produced, and it won an award in New York, and I used that occasion to, have an excuse to be in New York and get an award and impress one's mother when she didn't have anything to be impressed about in terms of my income level, and she died bearing that cross. And then that's Uncle Dan there. That must be around 1980 or 81. And about 6 weeks ago, it must have been back in, because I have a letter here dated November 29th from the National Organization for Women to my mother, and prior to this, back in November of last year, just a few months ago, my mother had called me up and she said, I'm really upset about this, this explosion of violence and guns all around the country. She said, who's that woman who's the president of NOW, the National Organization for Women? And I said, I think it's Patricia Ireland. My mother said, yeah, that's right, Patricia Ireland. She said, well, I want to write to her. She said, I've got an idea. She said, I want the National Organization for Women to organize a constant 24-hour round-the-clock vigil that surrounds the headquarters of the National Rifle Association in Washington, D.C. And she said, I don't want any speeches. And she said, and we don't need any placards. We just need people walking day and night as a way of pointing the finger of shame at the National Rifle Association and for their stupid approach to the problems of violence that we have in America. And my mother's idea was kind of like when the women in Argentina just maintained that silent vigil in front of the Capitol building in Argentina until they discovered the fate of their disappeared children. And they didn't speechify, and they didn't hold way big placards. They just walk silently around the square in front of the government building in Argentina. And they were successful, even though it took them years. And that was my mother's idea. And so she said, would you help me write that letter? And I said, you bet I would. And so it was her idea, and I just, put it in. I knew it was easier for me to get it on the computer. And so I did. I sent it. And my mother was really pleased to have this reply, a personal reply from Patricia Ireland, the president of the National Organization for Women, in which she says, Dear Maria, thanks very much for your letter regarding gun control and your suggestion to have ongoing demonstrations at the National Rifle Association building. I find your idea of an ongoing silent protest at once exciting and exhausting. Unfortunately, we just don't have the resources to implement your plan through this office. Hence, I have passed your suggestion on to our local chapter here in Washington, D.C. And while I cannot promise that the D.C. chapter will act on your idea, I am sure they will give due consideration. Again, my thanks to you for writing. I hope the upcoming holidays bring peace and happiness to you and your loved ones. So I'm real proud of my mother that she was one of the grandkids at the graveside. I forget whether I was at the graveside or at home. It doesn't matter. But he said, I like Graham because he said she was a take no hostages kind of a woman. When she was in for the hall and for the battle, take no hostages. She didn't want any hostages. She wanted to defeat the enemy. So she kind of tossed all of her 4 kids out on our own. I don't mean literally, but when we were kids, she was glad if we were gone all day. When I was a little kid, 6, 7 years old, I'd be gone for 3, 4, 5 hours. She didn't worry. She didn't sweat it. She started to worry when she got old. That she worried more about me when I was older and when she was older. Here's that Valentine from me that she didn't get a chance to open. And I think I'm going to leave it. There it is. And she never opened it. That was what I found when I got to Florida. And I haven't had I'm sure I said something sweet inside, but I don't think I'm going to open it just yet. It was postmarked Missoula, the February the 11th, and there it was, and she never got a chance to read it. There were also grim things going to Florida, dealing with undertakers and spending huge amounts of money on my brother's credit card and telling them that, no, we didn't want a police escort and we didn't want a van to hold the flowers and we did want her at home, and picking out a coffin and going in there and seeing all these. We did, my mother was one to save money. She was a good money saver, and I don't know how pleased she'd be with our choice, but we looked through the coffin room, and my brother and I, and the cheapest one there was $1,495 for polished steel, black, and it was terribly imposing. And I said, do you have anything less imposing or less expensive? And the guy said, well, we have something down the warehouse made out of wood, and kind of tacked on carpeting. And I said, well, we might want that one. Can you get one up here so we can take a look at it? That picture in back of me, that's my mother in the middle. Mary, you looked at it earlier. You said, boy, is that a typical mother pose. My older sister in the they're sitting in what are called Adirondack chairs. That's my brother on the left. And that must be around 1945. I don't know. Somewhere around that. But anyway, so my brother and I had to sit there with the undertaker and answer these endless questions. Was your mother primarily a homemaker, or was she have an education? Well, she was a registered nurse. We told the man, and he said, well, was that a 2-year program or a 3-year program? And I'm sitting there like this, ready to explode. And I look at my brother, and he's much more patient than I am, and so we had to debate that for a few minutes while all we want to do is get out of there. Anyway, we did pick the least expensive coffin, and that worked just fine. And we didn't want we wanted to be at home because we knew we wanted to talk, and we wanted to be able to talk loud, and we wanted to have her near us, and that was good. The thing that was probably the most significant thing that my brother and I did for ourselves in a very personal and intimate way. She died on a Sunday morning. We arrived in South Florida around midnight that Sunday night, and then the next day we went to the hospital because we had to deal with this request for an autopsy, and the supervising nurse came down, and she was very professional and kind, and we said, well, why? Why an autopsy? And I think it was because she didn't have her own physician involved. They admitted her through the emergency room, and they were really, I guess, frankly, surprised to find her dead. And we said, well, how did she die? And they said, well, we think it was aspiration, fluid on the lungs or choking or something. And my brother and our reaction was, look, she was 85 years old. She died naturally. She was old. She died. It was her time. And we didn't want to have an autopsy. I mean, whether it was for them to cover their backside for lawsuits, or whether they had pathologists who wanted more training by doing autopsies, but we didn't need it. The nurse understood completely, and she took care of it, and she went away. But anyway, and then we went and dealt with the undertakers and made those arrangements. And then that night, Monday night, my mother had now been dead about 36 hours, and here we are in Florida, and we haven't even seen her yet. And we knew that she was going to be embalmed because, they required it if there wasn't going to be an immediate burial. And all of a sudden I thought, I've got to see my mother. And I want to see her before she's embalmed. And I immediately, I'm so glad that I follow my gut instincts at times when in a way it could be, hard on a less assertive person than myself. And I immediately went to the phone as soon as I looked at my brother, and I said, look, I want to see Mom. And I called the funeral parlor and home, and I said, I want to see my mother, and I'm coming up now, and I don't want any embalming to happen before I get there. And the guy said, when are you coming? We're about to start the procedures. And I just said, don't start the procedures. We're on our way. So my brother and I went up, and he was just such a good brother. Is such a good brother. And so we went up to this, what I call the central pumping facility, I guess. And we went in, and there was a gentleman there waiting for us, and he welcomed us, and he said, right in this room here. And we went in, and the room was very, very large, and it might have been 50 feet long, and maybe that horoscope, Rich. I don't know, whatever you like. That's my mother's horoscope that I had done for many years ago, I think here in Missoula. And the astrologer said that, told my mother that hers was an unusual horoscope, and among astrologers is known as the Grand Cross. And she was born on June the 9th of 1908 with her sun in Gemini and her moon in Libra. And we might she says, you survive emotional turmoil and change well, rebounding from disappointment and going on. Anyway, this room that my brother and I found ourselves in was very big, hardwood floors. It was high-ceilinged. It was about 50 or 60 feet long and maybe half that wide, 30 feet wide. And the wall over there that we were looking at was floor-to-ceiling draperies. And then there was nothing in that room except my mother. And she was lying on a gurney right over against these draperies, and with a sheet over her up to her neck. And my brother and I walked over there. We weren't afraid at all, and we were glad to be there and glad to be with her. And I think that in many ways then that was the most emotional time and the most releasing time, because I found her fast asleep, yes, dead. Her skin was very soft. She looked really, really rested. She looked younger in the sense of, I think, being released from life's pains and struggles and weariness. And so in that sense, there was a relaxation of her face. And that's the sense I find, that she seemed younger to me. And her complexion was kind of like, the one thing I think our family was blessed with was we do have good complexions, and Rosie, and she never wore too much makeup, and her complexion was like that. She didn't have any cosmetics on at that time, and her hair was, obviously I think she'd been in the cooler, and the only thing that seemed very different to me, because she did have naturally wavy white hair, naturally white, but her hair on that night, it was as if she had just gotten out of the shower. It was like wettish, and it was all streamed back the way when you get out of the shower and maybe you brush your hair back and it's still wet, and it was kind of a mix of kind of like yellow, yellowish blonde and gray and brunette, and that still, it didn't bother me, but it kind of mystified me. I didn't know whether some of that coloration was a result of some old dye jobs from years gone by. But I took that time to really, really look at her closely and touch her. Her forehead, her hair, her cheeks, her feet, and I moved around her. I think I was kind of in a. It was nothing planned, but I just needed that time. I don't know how long we were there, and she had a nose in which there was kind of a little bump in it. I probably have a little bit of it, but my brother and his children have a more prominent ridge in the middle of their nose, and I touched that part of her, and I cried. I cried a lot, and I guess I told her. I'm not sure just exactly what words I told her, but I was glad to be there, and I think I've taken the time to describe all of that very private and intimate experience, because from my experience, I would strongly suggest to any of you who have not, dealt with, a loved one dying, someone who's quite close to you, and to whom you have responsibilities at the time of their death, that don't wait to see them with all the chemicals in their body when, they look kind of like a facsimile, because I did see my mother a couple days later, and it was really important for me, and I think it might be for at least many, if not most of you, to really see the real person that you know. Yes, they're dead, but they look, at least my mom looked at rest, and that was really, really important. And I won't rag on the funeral industry too much, but I think it was $4,300 for the funeral parlor, and we waked her at home, so we didn't even use any of their facilities. So $4,300 paid for a $750 coffin, the embalming, and $125 for the priest who came to the house and who celebrated the funeral mass and who went to the graveyard, and he certainly deserved every bit of that. And then the transportation, from the hospital to their facility, to our home, and then to the church, and then to the graveyard. So the transportation, the embalming, the $750 coffin, that was $4,300. That's insane. And my mother would not have approved of spending that much money, but you get in these situations, and if you haven't planned, then that's what you're up against, and you have to make decisions. And we knew that she didn't want to be cremated, so that was not a choice. But in contrast, my mother had made plans for Uncle Dan, her brother who died last October, the man that you see in the picture there. And Uncle Dan's, cremation and all of that stuff was like $700. And so the $4,300 got spent, and then it was $400 to open the grave and close it again, and another $400 for a concrete vault for the casket to go in, and then it goes on from there. So I mean, that was like $5,000 worth of expenses, and unlike here in Montana, which has some fairly flexible funeral laws, some of you may recall that years ago, as I was one of several or many, I don't know how many people who used the business called the Sweet Earth Casket and Cradle Company up in Kalispell, or out of Kalispell, Willie Von Brock. And he was selling kits to build a coffin for like $175. And his idea was that a bunch of friends should get together and use these kits and build a coffin, and whoever needed it first got to use it first, and then you got together and built another one. So I ordered one of those kits, and we built a coffin, and I have it, and it serves as a library and a book stand and wine shelf, and in the meantime. And I don't want to speak literally to Montana law, but if you're buried within 48 hours, you don't have to be embalmed. And I don't want to mislead anyone here, but I believe Montana law allows you to be buried on private property. I mean, in other words, if you've got a ranch, or if you've got a friend with a ranch with 40 acres, as long as you tell people what you're doing, you can take somebody out there and bury them. So that seems pretty healthy to me. I was thinking of we had when we brought my mom home to the house in Florida, which was on a Wednesday afternoon at 5 o'clock, and a lot of the grandchildren had a hard time coming from up around New York to get there. I mean, one of the grandchildren took 24 hours from Newark Airport. And anyway, we brought my mother's body into the house about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had a lot of food, of course. And then, they brought the cosmetician in to the house, too. And a woman of about 35 with maximum hair and maximum makeup. Oh, pleasant woman. And she was there with her, to get our approval for how our mother looked, and she had my mother's own lipstick, but she'd layered it on like she layered on her own lipstick, and so Marie had these my mother had these huge lipstick lips, and so we said, please, you've got to do something with those lips. And so she worked on toning them down, and then there was like these 3 funeral men standing by, there, and all in this Florida room, kind of this airy Florida porch in my mother's house, and there's these 3 funeral men, and they're all kind of crowding around, and I don't know what they're doing there, and we've got her in there, and I finally turned around. I mean, there wasn't enough space, that expression we all use, I need more space. Well, I needed more space, and I turned around and kind of went like this, and I said to look, can't you guys move back a little bit, And then the cosmetician is working on my mother's, lipstick, and then she'd turn to the funeral director type guy, well, what do you think, Mr. Brown? And he'd say, oh, it's so much better, it's so much better. And my nephew recalled later his behavior, by saying, oh, yes, yes, yes. It defines the word obsequious. Yes, yes, a yes man. And yes will always agree with everything. And it comes from the other word having to do with funerals called obsequies. But anyway, they finally left, and we'd gone to the flower stall at the supermarket and bought, just probably 16 flowering potted plants of very diverse, provenance, and white and red and yellow and maroon and pink. And we banked those up on my mother's, the bottom half of the coffin, which they keep closed. You look at someone's dead body in a coffin, and the lower half is usually closed, and it's weird. You look in there and you think, what, they don't have any lower body? Why is that custom involved or invoked? And phone calls from old and dear friends, and my mother's surviving contemporary women friends who were almost inconsolable in their own grief because their friendship with my mother, well, that was different for them, and they were losing a friend and not a mother, and that's always different. And the priest came that evening and said the Lord's Prayer, and then we had asked for the litany for the Blessed Mother, and so one of my nieces led that, and it goes. This is just some of the litany, just fragments of it, which my mother was a great inspiration to me, and I often stole lines from her for my work in the theater. And so some of those titles that they give to the Blessed Mother in that litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary, some of them it goes like this, and then after each one, then everyone says, pray for us. So some of those titles that they give in that litany are called Mother Most Amiable, Mother Most Admirable, Mother of Good Counsel, Mother Most Prudent, Mother Most Venerable, Mother Most Faithful, Health of the Sick, Comfort of the Afflicted, Star of Bethlehem, Queen of Heaven, Mirror of Justice, Mirror of Justice, Spiritual Vessel, Vessel of Honor, Singular Vessel of Devotion, Mystical Rose, Tower of Ivory, Ark of the Covenant, Gate of Heaven, Morning Star, Queen of Angels, Queen assumed into heaven, Queen of Peace. That's not all of them, but it was an important, I think, in terms of, we grew up in the Catholic faith, and those of us who were, of the widespread family, my brother, my sister, my sister's children, my sister, who's the mother of 8, has remained the most faithful to her Catholic faith, and my brother and I certainly less so. But it was a very comforting choice that we made, and we were comforted by that. And then we did our own storytelling there at the house, and there was laughter and there were tears. And at the Mass the following morning, we had asked the priest to use the parable of the Good Samaritan, and probably most of you are familiar with that parable, in which a man has been set upon by robbers and thieves and beaten up and left in the ditch. And another man comes along and sees him there, and sees that the man needs help, but he's too busy, and he just continues on his way and ignores him. And a second man comes by and ignores him, ignores the wounded victim lying in the ditch, and second man passes by, and finally the third man comes by, the Good Samaritan, and he binds up his wounds and treats them with the oils that he has with him, and then he carries him on to the inn in the next village and pays the innkeeper to take care of him. And he said, I will return this way again to compensate you in any additional way that you may need, because I want you to watch over this man. That's the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the priest characterized my mother as a giver. And the priest, whom we really didn't know, but he had heard our stories because he had stayed the night before at home with us and listened to the stories that the family and the friends told. And so he accurately characterized my mother as a giver, not a taker, not a taker, not a taker, he repeated. He said Marie was a giver, and she was. She gave to me, she gave to friends of mine in Montana and around the world. She gave to the Fortune Society, which is a little known organization which helps ex-convicts get back on their feet. And I didn't even know the Fortune Society existed until I would see her newsletters that she would get from them in New York. So then I found out that she was sending them a little bit of money now and then. And it's an on-the-level outfit. So the priest really listened up, and we really appreciated that he really listened to our stories the night before enough that he could accurately capture some of the spirit of my mother. And then we did more storytelling at the graveside, and I read, I think I've actually read this poem before, but in fact recently, but I think I'll read it again. And this is what I read at my mother's gravesite. And my niece, my goddaughter, Mary Pat, she stood up, and she's very svelte, attractive, dark. She's about 30 years old. She has one daughter, and she stood up there at the gravesite, and she put her hands on her hips, and she said, well, I don't know. A lot of you have had different things to say about Graham. She said, I know one thing. Graham gave me a great set of legs, and I'll be eternally grateful for that. So we all laughed at that. We laughed a lot. We told stories about my mom. We picked on her a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit. She would have expected that. And I read this, which I had shared with some of you sometime recently. And this is a message from a radio operator. A tribe of sea-born messenger angels using androgynous frequencies bounce significant static off the hull of my foundering bones. Spiritual antenna, long disquieted by the louder voices of America, begin sweeping the remorseful skies. My shipmates on the bowsprit wave semaphore flags in the frantic fog, save our souls. The telegrapher pounds out 3 dits, 3 das, 3 dits across the oceanic noise of unwired voices shouting, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. The keel plates groan and buckle. The helmsman steers in circles. The corsman shines a penlight into our ears and says our canals are jammed with endless dashes and dots without any points. The bosun whistles, and the chief speaks into the tube. Now hear this, now hear this. All hands abandon ship. There are no women and children, so the captain flees into the arms of a no longer buoyant Mae West and drowns amongst the jetsam. A soaking archangel emerges from the ocean, holding aloft an occidental monstrance recovered from an ancient wreck, beaming a host of heavenly messages. The radio operator unlocks the book of codes, begins to translate as we naked survivors plunge on through the storm. Seraphic trumpets conducting our vessel around capes of fear and hope. At last, a zephyr blows us into the gulf of peace. Seawater and white noise pour out of our ears. And finally, the briny benediction is unfathomed. Illusion of God is grand. Stop. All souls saved. Stop. Guardian angels are being piped ashore. Stop. Voice of the turtle is heard again in the land. Stop. All hands are now on liberty. Stop. Go. So that was part of my farewell to my mom at that point. My mom's on liberty now. She's on liberty. What else do we have here? Oh, here's a picture. I'd like to, Rich. Oh, you're okay. I'm sorry. No. Go ahead. Go back there. This is for me to hold up. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. That's okay. Rich Doyle is helping here run the chroma key, which allows you to see these photos here, and that's you might not. That's my mother. Just in October with her newest grandchild named Finn, F-I-N-N. That's Finn Gallagher. And Finn is a delight. I got to meet Finn for the first time when I was down in Florida for my mom's funeral. And Finn is named for the legendary Irish hero Finn McCool, who led the troops of Ireland against some of their earliest oppressors. And then so that's Finn. Hey, Finn. And we had a, and then here's well, I don't know whether that will take up. Let's see, what else have we got to you know, I mean, I'm privileged. You know, I rafted the Blackfoot River with my mom. Gosh, it must be, I don't know, 1979, 1980. And I was terribly naive at the time. I mean, while I had rafted the Yukon River, the Yukon River, when I rafted it, was a fairly calm, slow-moving river. And I, you know, had, you know, we had backpacks, and I was with two of my nephews, and you know, it was a challenge, but I mean, it wasn't, and we ran into some scary moments, but it wasn't rocks and rapids and you know, high water, and you know, that was not. I'd never done any kind of rafting like that, and my mother was out on vacation, and some friends from Japan were visiting, and I said to my buddy, another journalist from Japan, George Ringwald, I said, well, let's go rafting. I said, this is great rafting country. So he said, sure. He's another Aries like myself. Oh, sure, we'll go rafting. So we rented a raft and took it up to the Johns Rood Bridge, and you know, along the way, George and I are looking out the car window. George's wife and his two sons are with us, and my mother and myself, and George and I are looking out at the river that we're going to be rafting down, and we see these huge boulders and, you know, water crashing everywhere, you know, but of course, you know, what were we going to back down on this? You know, we said, and George and I are giving each other the eye, thinking, well, I don't know, should we not do this? But anyway, we got up to the Johns Rood Bridge, and we said, well, we'll give it a whirl, and we put the raft in the water, and then we, you know, helped everybody get in, the two boys and George's wife, Kimiko, and my mother, Marie, and And then George and I hopped in, and down we went to Blackfoot River, and holy Toledo, before we know it, like we're crashing through rocks and down rapids, and I had never done anything like this, and I thought, what, if I brought my mother out for a vacation in Montana only to at one point she was seriously out of the raft. I mean, like all of us are holding onto her hips and her we're grabbing at her. Just because she was laughing. She thought it was like a carnival ride. She had no idea, no concept of the danger that I now realized that we were in, or that we had taken on without, there were other rafters, but we were not experienced, river rafters. And, my mother's half out of the raft, and with her legs still in, and we're all have grabbed a hold of part of her. Somebody's got a hip, somebody's got part of her bosom, somebody's got her head, and she's laughing the whole time. And we hauled her back in, but that was the kind of woman that she was. She was indomitable, and she was adventurous, and she was fun. She gave us our sense of humor and our sense of storytelling. And she was very different, I think, from my brother and I. I think that she was a very private person in many ways, more private than myself. I'm an autobiographical writer and diarist, and somebody I ran into recently at the post office a couple of months ago said, well, he said, I know your show is called A Public Conversation, but isn't it really a conversation with yourself? And I said, it's true. A lot of the time it is. And my brother and I, who are great gossips and storytellers and are always on the phone with the latest family, stories, and the same is true of our nephews in particular, that the men in our family seem to be more, verbose and willing to, cough up secrets and tell secrets and gossip. By gossip, tell, what's going on with, our brother-in-law and, what's wrong and what's the trouble is and stuff like that. But my mother and my older sister are not, not like that. They were fairly private people. We've got not too much longer left. I could spend... It was very hard leaving the grave site in Florida when we were all still there. By this time, there were a lot of family friends at the Mass and at the house the night before. But when we got to the cemetery, it was just the family, the 8 grandchildren, the 2 great-grandchildren, and 2 close family friends. And then, like I said, we did more speaking and... talked a lot about loyalty and what a privilege it is to be part of a family, which though in American fashion is spread out across the United States, California, Vermont, Virginia, Washington. Even though we're spread out, we're very intensely involved with one another, and we remain extremely important to one another, and so family loyalty was important. And so there was a lot of talking about that. And the last thing and then my brother said, I think that if we'd had a picnic basket and a couple of bottles of wine, we could have stayed there all day. You don't want to finally say goodbye. You want to keep on talking. You want to stay. It's like, you feel like Lassie in an old movie. You want to stay by your master's grave, your mother's grave. You don't want to abandon her. You don't want to make that final departure, and yet you have to. And then my brother suggested that we, get in a group hug, circle, embrace, and we did. And then I thought, well, how are we going to, break this up? And I said, well, 3 cheers for Mom. And that's what we did. And we did hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! And I think the gravediggers were kind of nonplussed and wondering, what kind of a family we were. But we thought that was just, there had been a lot of sacred things said and prayed, but it was time for a cheer for a life well lived and a life lived spontaneously. So those are some of the highlights. I was saying to a friend earlier today that one of the things I noticed about privacy during these kind of difficult times that we went through, I noticed that when we did all of our speaking and praying, for those of you who tuned in late, that's my mom in the middle there, and my older brother and my sister. But I noticed that I didn't, which I do ordinarily, give a lot of eye contact, but when we were at home and doing our speaking near my mother's body there in the house, my eyes were shielded a lot of the time. I mean, I was looking down, or I don't mean severely down, but I mean, I was kind of keeping myself private. Maybe it's a way of protecting one's most intimate vulnerability, that if you looked too directly at my brother or my nieces or my nephews as they talked about my mother, if I looked them directly in the eye, maybe I was afraid that I would, that I would break up too much, and you kind of, maybe it's that Irish instinct, when the Irish are not known for being a race of weepers. We do it in big gulps maybe, but we don't cry too much. So I don't know what to make of that, but I was kind of always either looking out or kind of, and it was also a way of giving them their privacy as they spoke, I think. And we sat up late on the front porch, and we drank beer, and we drank wine, and we ate turkey soup, and we went to the ocean, and we swam, and we rode the breakers, and all of us in the family are swimmers and love to swim, and that was great. What a great privilege it was to be able to go down to the ocean while we were there every day. And I'm going to take just the last couple minutes to read this piece, which I've also shared before, but it's by Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk and poet. And we'll close with this. And now, the words of Thomas Merton, "And now my whole being breathes the wind which blows through the belfry, and my hand is on the door through which I see the heavens." Thomas Merton, by the way, was a monk who lived on at a monastery on a farm in Kentucky. So that's where he's writing from as he writes this. And he goes on, "The door, and now my whole being breathes the wind which blows through the belfry, and my hand is on the door through which I see the heavens. The door swings out upon a vast sea of darkness and of prayer. Will it come like this, the moment of my death? Will you open a door upon the great forest and set my feet upon a ladder under the moon and take me out among the stars? The roof glistens under my feet, this long metal roof facing the forest and the hills, where I stand higher than the treetops and walk upon shining air. Mists of damp heat rise up out of the fields around the sleeping abbey. The whole valley is flooded with moonlight, and I can count the southern hills beyond the water tank and almost number the trees of the forest to the north. And now the huge chorus of living beings rises up out of the world beneath my feet, life singing in the watercourses, throbbing in the creeks and the fields and the trees, choirs of millions and millions of jumping and flying and creeping things. And far above me the cool sky opens upon the frozen distance of the stars. I lay the clock upon the belfry ledge and pray cross-legged with my back against the tower and face the same unanswered question. Lord God of this great night, do you see the woods? Do you hear the rumor of their loneliness? Do you behold their secrecy? Remember their solitudes? Do you see that my soul is beginning to dissolve like wax within me. Eternity is in the present. Eternity is in the palm of the hand. Eternity is a seed of fire whose sudden roots break barriers that keep my heart from being an abyss. The hand lies open, the heart is dumb, the soul that held my substance together like a hard gem in the hollow of my own power will one day totally give in. And one by one, I shall forget the names of individual things. The words of Thomas Merton. I really appreciate those of you who have stayed with me and shared some memories, however distracted, of my mother and my family. And my mother loved Montana. She loved my friends here in Montana. My family here in Montana have remained true to me, and they were very good to my mom, and they were really glad to see her when she came. She was lots of fun, and I really, I'm thankful for the times that some of my family here in Montana had to share with my mother, and so thanks everyone for being as good as you are and as good as you can be. And rest in peace, and rest in peace to my mom, and saying goodnight, and thanks for listening and watching and sharing, and music up. Thanks, Richie Doyle and Mary Canty. My mother loved to hear me sing, and I'm part of this choir, so she really loved listening to these tapes.